Well, for those of you who didn't hear, we will open I don't think it's necessary to open the meeting again. We can, if anybody has any comments, again, you can click the raise hand button. You'll be recognized for a minute to make your comment. Feel free. Or you can type in the Q&A. I don't see anyone.
Fran has got a hand raised.
Oh, Fran Brutinetti. And actually, I'll add her.
TJ, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I just wanted to let you know that the town manager is here along with Steve Cavey under my name, so just noted.
They're with you in that room?
Yes. Yes, they are.
Yeah,
they
okay.
are here in the room. Town
All right, I heard them both. Great. So Stephen Cavey, Tom Coulter, and Fran Brutinetti are added to them. Any guests who wish to speak and make a comment? Hearing none. Great, we'll move on. So Tim Bonfatti of Vertex, the owner's project manager, and Carl Franceschi and Courtney Southwick have been working behind the scenes to come back to the committee with some sort of, I want to say proposal, but at least plan on how to move forward. And why don't I kick it over to Tim on the process?
Okay. So good evening, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen because it has the, I have the failed vote policy from the MSBA. And for those of you, as you remember from last week's meeting, we scheduled a meeting with the MSBA which is part of how you go through this process, to discuss with them the next steps as a result of the failed vote. So they sent the failed vote policy, and I'm not going to read it verbatim because I think we did discuss this, but the MSBA, and they confirmed to us during our meeting, the town has a 120-day deadline from the board approval, which was August 25th, to get the vote, to approve the project and move it forward. And they do allow for a revote. If you look at the last paragraph, in the event that a school district fails to approve funding for a proposed project within the 120-day deadline by no later than 10 business days following the failed vote, the school district must submit to the MSBA a plan that, number one, presents the vote results, number two, explains the school district's understanding of the reasons for the failed vote, and three, sets forth the school district's plan to remedy the failed vote and a suggested timeline for the remedy. The MSBA will review the plan and determine whether it can continue to set aside funding for the proposed project. However, a failed local vote likely will result in the school district being required to submit a new statement of interest to the MSBA and await a second invitation from the MSBA to enter the feasibility study phase. So in our meetings with the MSBA on Monday, they were very clear that the project would need to be voted on in substantially the same form to avoid being essentially putting another statement of interest in. So that means that although it can be voted in differently, and I'll go over with you all some of those revisions that we discussed last week again, but the notion of coming in front of the MSBA with, for instance, a single school option for the South School, which was one of the options that was discussed and studied at PSR, is not available without essentially submitting a new statement of interest and going through the process again. And they confirmed that with us on our call. So what we talked about and what TJ has presented to you is the notion that we need to look at today is whether we would vote to, so just to fall back on the timeline of that letter and making that request to the MSBA. That 10-day timeline that they reference is up on Tuesday. So we need to get something to them by Tuesday. And so what with the help of DRA and representatives from the district, we looked at sort of some options. And one of the ones that we're going to present to you tonight, as this committee would vote to recommend to the select board. The select board needs to set the timing of the election, needs to decide if they will set an election, a revote, and then they would need to obviously set the timing of it. So in the context of that, I'm going to share with you a draft of a letter, and this is a draft and is obviously subject to both this committee's input as well as I do need to clean up. For instance, the vote is tentative. That's just we need to get the actual vote results, but this is sort of what we would be proposing to the MSBA to consider for a revote of the Stoughton Elementary School project sometime this fall. So the project, so they ask us, as you saw, to try to understand why the project failed its vote. And so we have obviously it's a yes or no vote, so there's no real way to discern that definitively, but from what we have heard in sort of post-vote reaction, you know, the scale and scope of the design was an issue that people had. There was also, while there was a political action committee in support of the project, there was an organized opposition committee, and you know, while the school building committee was respectful of its obligations under the law, whenever you have two political sort of committees that are working at opposite ends, there's going to be conflicting information, and I think that may have contributed. We believe that as well as the rest of the team, that may have conflicted some of the information that was put forth. The project is a consolidation of the two non-contiguous districts. We, would be a key influence on a redistricting initiative, which will occur anyways. But the benefits of that district, the benefits of the new school town-wide may not have been clear to those other districts. The cost of school construction in general is shocking to the average homeowner. And while the building itself was unusually efficient from the point of view of an MSBA project, it had very little non-reimbursed space. The site costs of developing the parcel were above average. And we did decide to utilize CM at risk, which was decided by the committee based largely on the fact that logistically that would help in the planning for the project, but it is not as necessary as other projects. I mean, we've done other projects that are just as logistically difficult, design, bid, build. This was not, for an example, an ad reno project, but that does add a premium to the cost of the project. So the letter goes on to state, this draft letter goes on to state that the building committee, we discussed this was dated as of Friday, but obviously that would change, to look at certain initiatives to reduce the cost. So as you can see in these bullets, A, B, C, A, and B, further explore and simplify the community. Well, these are how we would look at how the steps moving forward, not just the reduced cost, but further explore and simplify the communication surrounding the benefits of consolidating from 5 to 4, and specifically how the other remaining schools will benefit from the space and program that would be available in those schools. Reconsideration of the decision to utilize CM at risk and understand the premiums and impacts for that in terms of versus the traditional design bid build chapter 149, and explore the measures to reduce the cost, particularly on site where without impacting, and they made that clear to us at the meeting with the MSBA, that any reduction to cost cannot impact the program or the space plan or the educational plan in particular. And so those steps are really looking at how do we look at reconsideration of the emergency access road, as well as other non-program related value engineering in terms of alternate materials and systems. And we set sort of an aspirational target of that of 10% reduction to the town's $66 million share. And then in general, just look at whether making sure that the messaging around the project is as accurate as possible, particularly concerning the tax impact, and that it's being promulgated consistently throughout the town. So the letter goes on to state that we would need an extension to the 120-day timeline, which the MSBA, at least verbally, has. Well, they've granted those extensions in the past. I'll leave it at that. At this point, at the time we drafted this letter, we were thinking that it would be a September 3rd potential of a September 3rd revote, because that's when the state primary is. I believe Chairman Recupero has learned from the state elections officials that we cannot combine this question on the state primary ballot. So the select board would need to consider whether or not they, whether it would be a special election or it would be included in the November ballot, the general election ballot. And so this would be sent to this letter would be sent to the MSBA on Tuesday, recognizing that the select board would not take this up at the earliest until July 2nd, when their next meeting would be. And that would, the request is obviously conditioned on their choosing to, voting in favor of the revote. So that is kind of a summary of the discussions and the developments that occurred since your last meeting. We have not done any, we have looked at sort of preliminarily those topics for consideration for reduction in cost, and we feel that they're serious. We feel the 10% reduction target, I think collectively DRA and Vertex believe is achievable. But we would need to do a little more work and come back to you with what that would look like should the committee and the select board vote to do the revote. So that's really kind of how we left it from Thursday and how we are asking, and what we're presenting you tonight is essentially to prove whether or not you want to do the revote, and then approve sending that letter and it's substantially that form to the MSBA.
Great. So, Catherine, if you don't mind, we had I opened it up to comments at the beginning of the meeting. I don't know if anybody tried and couldn't, but I want to offer that opportunity again. Again, 1 minute each for comments. Eric, you got that?
Yep. And if feel free to cut me off. I'll keep an eye on it. But.
If you could limit it to 1 minute each, if you could be cordial, and I'd ask that nobody make any comments about persons or personalities except the chair. You can badmouth the chair all you want of the school building committee.
All right. I'm going to start with the. Oh, sorry, TJ. Didn't mean to cut you off.
Sure. No. Again, click the raise hand button. That will give Eric the message to activate your microphone, or you can type something in the Q&A bubble at the top of your screen.
All right. It looks like we'll start with Melanie DiBiasio. Sorry if I butcher your names. All right, Melanie. Yep. Try to unmute yourself.
I'm good. Hi. I just wanted to make a comment. I just think that given the amount of time that we had to communicate the information that we needed to communicate to get voters to the polls, which was extremely limited. Our committee was formed in May. I think we had a little bit more time, we definitely could have gotten the message across much more strongly to get people to vote yes. And I truly feel that if we were able to get an extension on this project, that we could do a much better job of that, because I think there was a lot of misinformation that was being shared on the other side that we could have very easily corrected, gotten the right facts and figures out there to all of the voters, and then hopefully been able to get a different result.
Thank you, Melanie.
Okay. Next up, we've got Allison Riddington. All right, Allison, you can unmute yourself.
I just wanted to second what Melanie said in that we barely had time to create awareness. So I think in the time we had, we did start to create some awareness that there was even an issue, but not enough time to actually get proper answers to inquiring minds. And with some of the reputations in the town with old buildings and what are we going to do and what's included in the budget, a lot of this was not shared publicly. So there was a lot of confusion, and we just need enough time to give those proper answers to the people that want to vote for their town, but don't know what the right thing is to do. So I just think that we need more time.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Peggy Sewick.
Just a reminder to people asking questions, you have to unmute yourself when Eric calls your name.
Peggy, do you see the unmute button? Maybe up at the top if you're on your computer next to the leave button. And if you're having a hard time, you can type something into the Q&A and I'll read it out for you. I don't see any other hands in the meantime, so I'll give you a minute.
Peggy, are you there? All right, I don't want to wait too long, but if I see her mute button change, we can allow it. Anybody else? I see another hand.
It looks like Jonna. All right, Jonna, can you hear me? You unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to say that you guys pushed for this to happen really quickly, and now you're upset with the results of the vote. I mean, lots of times votes don't come out the way I want, but that's what I have to deal with. And the people have spoken. They don't want a tax increase. So why are you pushing this despite the fact that the people don't want it?
Thank you, Jonna. It looks like Peggy might be unmuted. No?
You can give Peggy another shot here.
You unmute
Peggy,
by
any luck?
Myself.
Oh, you
It
just
says
had it,
only-
Peggy. There you are.
I did?
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, okay. I think it would be a great idea to compare what it would cost to repair each school against new project. This is what we did with the library. And it was so kind of close, or the recognition that there would be no state funds coming in to help us do the renovations if we chose to do them by the town and not go this project. I think a lot of people would still understand they're going to have to pay taxes, and they're getting a big approach to a solution that is needed. And so this is what we did with the library, and it seemed to have an effect of good. We explained that the boiler all the things wrong with the school, the current building, what it would cost to renovate, and then compare it to new and the energy that would be saved by doing the new building versus the old. And it seemed to have an effect. And again, letting people know, listen, you're still going to pay taxes, but you're on your own with no state aid. That would have a big effect, I think, on people. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I think that would work as one solution.
Excellent. Thank you, Peggy. I did see another hand go up.
Rachel?
Yep. Rachel should be able to unmute.
Hi, sorry about that. I just wanted, everyone can hear me now?
Yep.
I just wanted to say that, first of all, I appreciate all of the work that the building committee did. I've been looking over some of the documents, and I really think you guys have done an excellent job of going over what the alternatives were. And I understand why we picked this building, and it is honestly the most cost-efficient building, given the amount of grants, given maximizing the points that the MSBA grant could give us, lowers our bill. I think we were looking at the numbers, and it is $66 million for this town versus having to pay $92 million for refurbishing both the South and the Wilkins School, which both would be needed. So honestly, if you want lower taxes, this is the way to go, voting for this building. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll wait a couple more seconds if anybody wants to get one last question in before we move on to the substance of the meeting. I see one, Eric.
Okay. All right, Marina.
Hello, I don't have video. Okay, let me, okay. I just wanted to say, I know we all discuss and argue about taxes versus, allowing 67 million on people to put on and raise taxes going forward. But I talked to a lot of people, and I talked to a lot of seniors and people with different incomes, and they're really, really concerned and scared that on top of this school, there are other debts that right now all of us are paying, residents are paying. So everybody kind of concerned in this inflation that, our taxes keep going higher, the groceries, the, high cost of living. So people are really concerned, and we're not against the school. We're just very concerned that we're going to have problems, foreclosing our homes, not be able to provide for our kids. And it's going to drive a lot of people to disaster, especially vulnerable people with one income, paying for high for gas, utilities. It's over the roof, and we all pay for it. And I know we all struggle with that. So we're not against the school. We're just trying to make a point of put it on hold at least for a year. Let's see how where our economy stands, and where we are at that point. Because I don't know if you've seen it, because I do look at the market, and we have 2 condos for foreclosure. So you want to see more, and people are going to lose their homes. So we need to be really careful. And it's not about the school and our kids and precious. And we need to be concerned about people with different incomes, with different level of living, with one income, seniors, and all other situations. People in condominiums. We've had our condo went up to like almost 600, 700, some have 1,000, depending on the size of the property. So there are a lot of things, and prices keep going up. So we are, members.
Marina, just going to give you a quick 10-second
Yes.
warning.
Sorry. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Go. You can finish, Marina. Just if you have a closing comment.
Yes.
feel
Also,
free.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I want to see, me personally, I want to see the breakdown. If this school goes through, I'm against another voting. So we already voted and we made a point. So we want to see how much we're paying plus library, plus high school, plus everything else. And I'm sure next year will be another project like this. So my salary didn't go up, and I'm sure yours didn't. So
Thank you, Marina.
Thank you.
Last question, if we can, and Eric, that's Elena. Oh, last comment, excuse me. Eric, you still there?
Yep, does that work?
Elena, you have to unmute
Elena?
yourself. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep, there you are.
So my the South School is going to need to have something done regardless. And I'm just wondering how many years it's going to last in the current condition it's in. Like, how much longer is it going to be, if it even is right now, safe for our children who attend there? Because it's my understanding that something has to be done regardless. So everyone's taxes are going to go up anyway. So how much longer do we have? Like, do I have to start looking to see if I can afford private school for my kids? Or do I have to put my house on the market and move to a town with an elementary school where my kids can actually breathe and they don't have like leaky windows or leaky ceilings? So my concern is really like, what about my kids right now? How much longer do I have before I need to make a decision about my kids' future?
Thank you, Elena. Eric, we have one more, and this will be the last one. I see Nancy. I don't see her last name, but you could unmute her and she can make a comment. We can.
Yep.
Hi, sorry, my last name is Nunez. I was going to say that the longer we wait, the more money we are losing in this grant. And without this grant, we're going to be paying double or triple than what we would have been paying. And the kids need this. The school is decrepit. It really should be like condemned. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yep.
At that, we'll close. Catherine, unless you and your board have any objections and you want to keep going, we'll close off public comment. We'll move on. Hearing no objections.
I think we're ready to move on.
Great. So Tim, Carl, Courtney, if I could toss it back to you on what generally you've been working on over the last week or so.
Well, sorry, Carl, you want to go ahead and speak?
I could just sort of reinforce what Tim said, that we have contacted our cost estimator on a preliminary basis just to get, some level of confidence that we could achieve what we're suggesting here, that we could reduce the town's share in the vicinity of 10%, from the current estimate of $66 million or so, by moves that would not, hopefully would not reduce the state's grant, would only reduce, the town's share in ways that do not affect the educational functionality of the building, certainly not the program, and not the size of the building and so forth. So we think it's a bit premature to put those on the table right now for consideration, but we did mention one of the major ones, as Tim said, suggesting a different building delivery method, and we still have confidence that would, yield a successful project to go design, bid, build it versus construction manager at risk. We still got, Tim's firm, we've got DRA's firm, and we still get to pre-qualify contractors. So we should reassure people that, we'd still have a high degree of confidence that we'd get a successful, well-built project with that alternative building delivery method. but we have a preliminary list that's over a dozen items that we think deserve a little bit further study, but then consideration for the building committee to achieve that reduction in cost, knowing that cost is one of the factors, maybe not the only factor. But the other thing we wanted to say too is that we could certainly use the additional time to help you get the word out of what the no vote means more specifically to the South School. We did do a base repair estimate, but as we've said and we've discussed in previous meetings, we never fully developed that into a quote unquote project as to what sort of time frame, what sort of implications, and so forth. And as someone has said, and I think we've said, obviously, no vote does not equal zero cost to Stoughton ultimately, that there are things that will need to be addressed sooner than later, not literally tomorrow, but soon. And so we could spend some of this time, if it is decided to revote and supported that way, that to help, better paint the picture of what's involved in trying to repair the existing South School.
Thanks, Carl. Catherine, why don't we now, I'll yield the gavel and you can, your committee member, because in the end, the school building committee is, we're charged with recommending a building that meets your policy. So why don't you and your committee offer any questions, comments, or otherwise, and then we'll go back to the school building committee, who ultimately has to vote on this. But I don't want to monopolize the chair. I see Armando is raising his hand. Eric, you might need to recognize him in.
Armando should be able to unmute. He is a presenter.
Yes, okay.
Am I muted?
No,
I'll
you're
recognize
good.
Armando.
You're good.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Carl and, thank you, Carl and Tim can give us perhaps a ballpark how much it would cost to develop the repair scenario, in which we'll have a better understanding of the costs. One of the, I felt that one of the nails came from the fact that we weren't able to provide a more graduated costs. How much did it cost for what? How much? And then if the ADA kicks in, how much that would cost, and of course, it'd be wonderful to be able to get the time frame. But essentially, I'm curious on how much it would cost the town of Stoughton to go down that rabbit hole, so we can better understanding of costs related to that.
Well, I mean, Carl, we did Armando do a base repair, which did because a base repair requires you to replace the systems that are beyond their useful life. It did trigger the handicap code upgrade, so that is in that $35 million construction cost for the south building. What that doesn't include, as Carl mentioned, is because the committee did not move forward with any further investigation of that, we would have to talk about how we would do it in terms of phasing it, what sort of potential modulars would be needed to put at least a portion of the students in while elements of the building are being segregated and worked on. And then we'd also, obviously, there's soft costs that we would need to include in that. So, that was done. That's what we've been communicating for the last several months, that $35+ million. And we would have to go back now, and we would, that's Kyle mentioned, we can spend more time on that, but it's not a perfect project unless the town was willing to actually explore it. It would be, and design it and spend the time on that. And that's not how the committee voted back in August of last year. So that's why
we should point out too that is truly just a repair project we did do a renovation project to add space to the building so that we had sort of an apples and apples comparison between, a new construction to house 515 target enrollment versus a renovation to house 515 target enrollment. But the base repair is only going to house fewer than you have today, probably, by the time you renovate the systems, the corridors, the ramps, the toilet rooms that need to be brought up to code and so forth. So again, it doesn't address the town-wide, redistricting or enrollment issues as a repair project. We do know what a full-blown renovation would be, and that's unfortunately not, something that you could go back to the MSBA on without getting back in line. And, our experience has been that it takes, 8 to 10 years before a town tries to, get funding on, a revised or a resubmitted project like that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd open up to the rest of the school committee. Lindsay Clarkler, any comments or questions?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple questions. I think, so I want to say, first of all, I really, really deeply appreciate all of the work that the building committee has done up to this point on the project. I think you all put a lot of thought and care into presenting a really strong option, and the voters did not approve it. So I think what we need to do is take that feedback. And as we head into potentially bringing this back to the voters, what I think we don't want to do is bring exactly the same thing for a second vote. So I'm curious if you can all kind of explain, Tim, this might be a question for you, but really for whomever. What is can you just sort of list out the things that we cannot change if we are staying in the running for MSBA funding? What are the things that are sort of not adjustable, and then what are some of the things that we can explore? I know you've addressed some of this already with the construction manager and a couple other pieces, but was hoping we can kind of do what is the list of things that cannot be adjusted, and the list of things that we can look into adjusting or can plan to adjust, or does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and I'll let Carl and Courtney talk about some of the things that they're looking at that Carl referenced. Primarily we cannot change the educational plan, program, space, fundamental nature of the project that the MSBA board voted to approve. They will not. That would require a resubmission of a statement of interest. So what can be changed are things like, well, I mentioned the site, right? We are looking at the egress road, the secondary egress road, which is very expensive, and is something that we're looking at alternate ways of being able to achieve the same goal. And that's not changing the educational program or creating, that's essentially keeping the same scope. And then Carl and Courtney, you have other things I think that are more around looking at different aspects of the building finishes.
Yeah, in terms of the building itself, we can't really change, like we say, the programmatic spaces in the building, their relationship, the massing, the size of the building, things like that. But we can look at things like some finishes, like the elevation, the external, building materials, the size, the number of windows, the configuration of those windows, the use of the roof. We had some vegetated roofs. We had some exterior roof decks with railings, and those things could be, they were mentioned as being, potentials, I think, in the education plan of using the exterior. We can use, the ground as opposed to the roof, I guess, in that regard. So it's those kinds of things. And it still requires some review by the MSBA staff as to whether even those changes that we just mentioned still retain in their minds the true project scope and the education plan. So we're not the judges, the ultimate judges of that. The MSBA is going to review whatever proposals we come up with.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And just to make sure that the definition sort of is out there and folks understand, when you say educational plan, that's referring to like the purposes of like the classrooms and the learning spaces, right? Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, it's both quantitative and qualitative. The education plan, says encompasses the fact that the target enrollment is 515 students, and that the district, the Stoughton, is going to redistrict from 5 elementary schools to 4. That is kind of inherent in the size of the building being proposed. The organization of the building, that there be, a lower elementary and an upper elementary, and the classrooms be organized into grades, neighborhood sort of grade structure, that the learning commons be the library space, be the hub of the building, that there be a community aspect to it that's easily, configured, that the public spaces of cafeteria and gym are accessible. So all of those things kind of add up to the qualitative part of it, but there is that quantitative part too, about the number of children per classroom is part of it, and that sort of calculates into how many classrooms then to accommodate the 515 target enrollment, and so forth. So it is a pretty comprehensive document that's gone through a couple of reviews with the MSBA, and is incorporated, into the current schematic design.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think that's really helpful for understanding like what are the parameters that we are working within, and like have been working within, but will continue to work within, and then sort of where are the areas of flex, I think is really helpful to understand. And the other thing I want to throw out there too, and this is probably for the chairs, is just more of a comment, but I'd be really interested. I know we have a sense of why folks weren't as on board with this project as we had hoped in the community. I think we've heard a couple different takes, a couple different arguments as to why this maybe wasn't something they could get on board with. But I think in the coming months, if we're moving forward with this in the fall, I think it would really be beneficial for us to listen and understand. I think, obviously we heard loud and clear, folks weren't on board with the project as originally presented. And I think I'm really curious, and I think I speak for, or I won't speak for my colleagues, but I would assume that there is a lot of curiosity around like why, and really understanding that and making sure that, at the end of the day, we need a school that's going to serve the needs of students. But I know having a space that is also useful and acceptable and like exciting for the rest of the community is also a priority. So want to really understand and get under the hood and like look at what were the concerns, how can we really specifically address those moving forward. And that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chris, Shannon, do you have any comments or questions to add?
I do, Madam Chair. I was in the process of writing a reminder down so I didn't forget. I'd like to echo Lindsay's comments. I am so appreciative of the school building committee's time and effort, and constant flexibility and adaptation when it comes to providing information out to the community around this project to ensure that as questions surfaced that they were being addressed. To Lindsay's other point about communication, I do want to make sure that we find a way of effectively communicating the pain points that we're trying to solve, and why we feel this is the best method to solve them moving forward, and making sure that we communicate that in a way that that reaches as much of the community as possible. And I know that was a concern that was raised in terms of, whether we're communicating or advertising things online versus in person versus in print. So making sure that we've got a sound communication strategy as well, I think would be very helpful. Yeah. One question I do have for the school building committee is during the many public forums and in-person forums that you've had, have you collected the questions that have been asked by constituents and provided answers? And if so, where would they find that document if they are viewing right now?
There's a running Q&A. Someone correct me unless I'm misstating that. There's a running Q&A list on the project website, which is accessible through the school website. There's a big conspicuous tab that says school building project.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that question, TJ.
Sure.
Another question I had is I just wanted to get a better understanding of the committee's proposal in terms of where we would be able to make cuts to the project without risking MSBA funding or adversely impacting the educational efficacy of the space. So I know that you mentioned several in terms of the access road, for example, and the second entrance, and then how you bid out for the contract. Are those the two largest cost savings right there? Earl? Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I understood that correctly and wanted to reiterate that point. And I would like to reiterate that you had a very challenging charge in that you were trying to create a solution that would address dual problems that Stoughton is currently experiencing. One is not one, but two outdated elementary buildings that are in serious need of upgrade and updating to ADA compliance. And then also the added, I think, fortunate challenge of continued increasing population of Stoughton. I think it's awesome that Stoughton continues to be a place that people want to move to and raise their families. But that has created some pain points with us in terms of current school building enrollments. So renovating the school, as previously mentioned, simply is not, or rather repairing the school is not an option. It would have to be renovated to increase the space, which would be a lot more costly. And one of the reasons that I believe the committee has proposed that we move to a single building that will accommodate the space while addressing the school update needs. So I just wanted to reiterate that point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Karen Powers, I'd like to note that she did join us. I'd like to give the opportunity for her to have any questions or comments to share.
Yes, thank you. And I want to say thank you to all the work that all of you have put into this. I know this has been a long process, an intensive process. So I really appreciate all the work that's been done to try to get the information out and to try to find the most economical proposition for the town of Stoughton. I know that it's not just the South School that's an issue, and it's an issue that can no longer be held off. This is a school that's been held off for a very long time, and now it's at a point where something has to be done. And I think if I heard correctly, it's going to be 35 million plus that the town is going to have to pay to get that school up to at least a basic school where it's a safe school, which wouldn't even address the needs of the future, but just get it to a point where it's safe for students and faculty. But there's also a cost for the Wilkins School to try to do something with that. I haven't heard a price for that. Again, it's not going to address our future needs. So that's something that's still going to have to be addressed at some point in the future. So I'm wondering if you have a cost for, I think you said 35 million for plus, not including modulars that would have to be used for the South, a price for the Wilkins also, just to get those two into compliance. And then maybe someone has an answer for me as to where that money would come from, and is there any kind of way that it would be a zero tax increase for those projects? Is there any scenario that anyone can tell me where we can do all of that and not have a debt exclusion or a tax increase or some kind of loss to the town of their services. Thank you.
Well, in response to that, if I could, Catherine, we did do a base repair on the Wilkins as well, and it was in the same order of magnitude, around $35 million. It doesn't quite have the same urgency, but again, because some recent work has been done there on the windows, I believe, and I can't recall, I think it was the roof as well, maybe. But certainly it still has some systems issues, and it has had some other issues that on the site that put it in that same order of magnitude. Again, the time frame for these is a little more indeterminate. There's always the issue that something could break tomorrow, but there's no code or imminent safety issues with the schools that require something to be done because they're quote unquote not up to code. They were up to code when they were built years and years ago, but codes and standards have changed, as we all know. And that's what we really measure against when we try to quantify the base repair.
So can I interject for a second, Catherine? So Tim, Carl, Courtney, when you say base repair and you estimated, I know the answer, but I just want to be clear on this. Tim went into and sort of give a broad view of what of soft costs that aren't in that base repair cost that would be included. Can you just put a little more shape to what soft costs include? And is there a percentage, like a standard percentage based on project costs that we can ballpark for people on what a base repair would cost? It would have it as a total project cost. I know we can't do that until
we should probably do that as part of a follow-on and do it with more thoughtfulness because the soft costs for a base repair would be different than the soft costs we're doing in the new situation for both positive reasons, meaning less expensive, and for reasons that probably mean more money. And I just think we need to spend time with DRA and talk through that before we can. So I think obviously we're hearing that people need to hear much more about what the costs are without this project, and we definitely will work with them on that.
Okay. Sorry, Catherine, back to you.
Does anybody have any thoughts on any other funding possibilities other than MSBA and debt exclusion? Those really are options for funding any school project, correct?
There's no other school funding, grant funding other than the MSBA program that I'm aware of at all. I've never heard of that.
We did mention that in calculating the town share, we were very, you might say, conservative because the project as originally proposed would qualify for significant rebates from the utility company and from the I forget, is it the Inflation Reduction Act. Which are into the seven figures perhaps. So that could be calculated in. I don't know literally how the financing works as to when that money comes in, and can it be used to pay off bonding or borrowing versus going to the general fund of the town or something. But it is real money coming back to Stoughton ultimately, and with a high degree of confidence that it would be real. So that's I think part of the calculation.
Yeah, we would try to bet better because it's not money that's in hand. We didn't feel it was appropriate to count it, but it is largely being it is now developing where other communities are getting it, and we kind of have a history now. We can go back and determine that, and I think we'll lay that out for the committee. And it coming up, and as Carl said, it's significant. In other communities, it's subsidized the cost of geothermal wells, which are seven figures plus.
Right. Thank you. To emphasize that that's not going to be $50 million worth of rebates, but it could be $1 or $2 million or a couple million.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Thank you. In the interest of time, I'd like to turn it back over to TJ. I know we need to get back to discussing the vote and what we're going to do next, what the building committee is going to do next. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to, at this point, turn it to the school building committee for any questions or comments. And I think all you need to do is unmute and speak, but for order, since everybody's not on the screen, raising your hand might be more efficient. Who's first? Someone needs to be first.
Dr. Baeda.
Yeah, Dr. Baeda.
Thanks, TJ. Just a clarification on what the motion potentially is of the school building committee. I see it as the potential of a two-part motion. I don't think it needs to be two separate votes, but I'll defer to the chair. I believe that the two-part motion would include the first stage, which is to support the filing of a letter to the MSBA as per the draft that Tim noted. And the second part of that would be to request the select board consider a ballot vote in, I believe it's going to be November, the second ballot for the November election, the presidential election, with cost estimates, et cetera, to come in the near future. Is that correct?
I think so. I'd ask Tim if that hits all the points that we need to.
No, that I think that's
Okay.
the nuance on that I think would be, do we want to recommend the voting date? The select board have two things to do. They have to decide whether they want to approve moving forward, and then they would have to approve a date. And I don't know whether that's really a call for the committee, whether they want to suggest a date or they want to just leave that open to the select board.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that we don't want to overstep as a building committee to inform the select board, the policymakers, of what the date should be. That's really up to them. We do know that they don't have the authority to put it on the primary date, but they could choose another date if they so choose, pending the MSBA even allowing it to go that far as well.
Right.
Great, thank you.
On the building committee, not everybody's on my screen, so you can either speak up or raise your hand. All right, if there's nobody from the building committee, I'm happy to speak, but I kind of want to make sure everybody else has an opportunity before I do. I don't want to monopolize the microphone, but all right, hearing none, I'll just offer my own thoughts. So of course, we thought long and hard about this vote. Large vote turnout, 55% to 45%. We can't ignore that there was a message from the voters on cost. I have some strong thoughts on the messaging behind that cost, but leaving that aside, the point is, there was a message sent to the committee. So to the extent that we can rescope our project without affecting our reimbursement with MSBA or their approval to date, I would certainly like to do that, because the alternative is withdrawal of the SOI. And I heard it said earlier, and I don't mean to comment to any specific, respond to any specific comments, but I just want to say generally. So Tim and I sort of workshop this, the timeline for what would happen if we did have to withdraw and a new SOI would be submitted. So, in the best case scenario, which I don't know who has, what opinions on within MSBA on this project, if it were resubmitted under an SOI, still have to go through a full year feasibility study. That, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but that feasibility study appropriation would now be non-reimbursable.
We have to resort back into the statement of interest.
Yeah, there would be a statement of interest.
So in other words, we would need to file a statement of interest when it's, the next deadline is, next year, I think.
Yeah.
And we'd have to get more discussion with them. And then there's a process where it takes they have a rolling admission, and potentially Stoughton with the problems could be admitted sooner, but that once you get admitted, you still have basically 9 months to organize your funding for feasibility, make your building committee. There are 3 or 4 things which you went through already on this project that you'd have to go through again separately. Then you can hire, once they allow you into what they call feasibility, you then can hire your owner's project manager. And then the process starts with hiring the architect again. So I'm thinking you'd be talking at least, before you even got to this point again, it would be at best 3 years, but I'm not even sure that I'd have to do the math on,
right,
timing it out.
TJ, to your point, the MSBA will not pay for another schematic design submission for this. They will not reimburse for schematic design if there's a redesign. That'll totally be on the town's dime.
Yeah, they would not pay for the feasibility under the new SOI.
Which is going to be about $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I mean, running through that in my head, in my mind, and I only speak for myself, I still would like to hear from anybody on the building committee who has any contrary thoughts, for sure. We have a short window and one opportunity to take advantage of something that we may not see in the foreseeable future, and yet we still have a problem to solve. I've heard the opposition, and some of which, I don't want to get into debating with myself about the opposition, but what I've heard is, why don't we do just a simple school? And I think the picture of the simple school is something more uniform, not as elaborate. And I've heard, some names put on this particular building like it was some sort of palace. And, I've contended with those characterizations because the point of the pinwheel design probably wasn't wise to call it pinwheel design because that makes it sound fancier. It wasn't created for style points. It was created for reimbursement points. It maximizes what we needed to submit to get the most money for MSBA, and to compromise that by making, a square box of classrooms, we also get less money from MSBA. And if we had to redo this whole process from start to finish for a new project, which is the alternative to a second vote with a broader outreach and education plan for the public, if we had to redo all that, sure, you could come up with a new building design, but I'm not sure you could maximize the reimbursable space the way this project does. And in fact, this year, the reimbursement amount from MSBA was increased this year significantly. And just in simple dollar figures, the value of that reimbursement money goes down annually and project costs go up annually. So if delaying this for several years, 5, 6, 7, 8 years per call, but I don't want to pin that on you, Carl, but that was in your experience, the approximate.
Mm-hmm.
But the cost, I've looked at schools that have had failed debt exclusions and what they ended up doing afterwards. I have yet to see one, certainly willing to listen to anyone who can present it. I've yet to see one that came back for a second shot under a new statement of interest that came back cheaper. I think inevitably these projects, when they fail, they go through whatever process and they come back. And however, whether it's through a different plan or a different different public education campaign about the project, they inevitably end up with something that's more expensive. And right now we have I want to put it in terms of desperate, but I'm not employed by the schools. I do know that we have a school that has 317 students in it and is overcrowded now. And the alternative to this school was building a simple replacement for the South School with a design capacity of 215 students and probably somewhere a maximum capacity, I'm guessing, of around 280 or so. It's obsolete the day it opens. It's undersized the day it opens. So to address this 6, 7, 8 years from now, I think is irresponsible. And I'll also say this. If you break down the cost per pupil, so we were allotted by MSBA 515 students on enrollment capacity for the consolidated school and 215 students for the single South school replacement.
It was 250, actually, TJ, 250.
250. And we've estimated the costs of those. And if you break down the cost per pupil, doing a consolidated school essentially means we can pay for a school and a half now, as opposed to 2 schools separately at different times. And in the end, I think, look, if we delay a second school project and the costs go up on that, inevitably what we're doing is we're asking the kids that are in that school to pay for the cost of a more expensive renovation of that school or replacement when they're old enough to be taxpayers. And I think that's irresponsible. So every day of the week, I would present the same plan. Every day of the week, I would try to scope it the same with the same reimbursable space and credits. And in this case, I think it's less responsible to put those costs and the burdens of just the logistics of the day-to-day operations of the school. School like this should ease up education for teachers and students across the board in the K-5 system. Someone in the schools can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was certainly the idea. That's why I would ask the Board of Selectmen, or the Select Board, to consider this for a second vote. And with, of course, my promise and commitment to reach out to anybody and everybody who has a question of it so that I can, and I have, and I think everybody on the committee has, to answer any questions that we have. This is, I think the first meeting that we've had where there's been more than maybe 1 or 2 people attending, and that's good. We'll have public forums. We'll answer questions. We'll certainly be before the Select Board and answering their questions. But in my mind, the responsible action is to try to stick with what we have right now because it's the most cost efficient and in the end, the cheapest proposal that we could find. And I'll also say this, we can do more. We could, as you heard, we can cut 10% off the price by removing construction management at risk, by revising the access so that we don't have to have an emergency access in the back, an expensive one. We can also take some of the finishes inside and tweak those a little bit. I'm confident we can do that. I think it's a better school with all those things. But I'll end where I began, which is, we did hear the voters. I still want to do the responsible thing, but I certainly want to credit what the voters have told us, that they're concerned about taxes. It's not 6.4%. I think I'm confident the estimate will come below, for the average taxpayer, below 300 annually. I just ran rough numbers, so I don't want to say it, and we don't have a final project cost, but I'm pretty confident that that number will come below 300 for the average taxpayer. And I'm more than comfortable saying to the voters, yes, we heard you. We revised this. Please look at this again and let me tell you all about it because it's the best thing for the town and for the school children. That's it for me. Anybody else, please? If there's no one from the building committee,
I'll just second what you just said, TJ. I'm not sure I could support a project with a significantly less scope. This is the most efficient project that this committee could have come up with, and to support anything less than this is irresponsible. So I agree with everything you just said.
For those who don't know, by the way, Joe Buckley worked for the MSBA for many, many years. So that doesn't add any credit to you for today, Joe, but
obviously didn't help either.
Anybody else, please? If nobody from the building committee has anything else to say, let me just run down the list to make sure. I don't see anyone. So if there's nobody else from the school building committee that has anything else to add, is there a motion to present?
I would say the motion would be to approve applying to the MSBA for permission to revote the project as part one, and part two, subject to part two is requesting the select board to set an election date and to approve that request and set an election date sometime in the fall.
All right, as stated, Eric, if you're here and you're still following and taking minutes, yep, and you got all that, if everybody heard how Tim recited it, is there a motion to that effect? That would be, again, can you repeat it one more time, Tim, just so we can.
Sure, it would be a motion
clear.
to approve the submission of a letter to the MSBA in substantially the same form as what was presented tonight, that requests their permission to revote the project, subject to the select board approving our request to do so in the fall at a date of their choosing.
Right. Is there someone from the school building committee who would make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
A motion by Joe Buckley. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by, I didn't get that, but Jake, was that you?
I was one of them.
Oh, wait. So second by Jake, or someone else did, but I missed it. So we'll use Jake. Any further discussion of the school building committee?
TJ, I'm happy to take a roll call.
Great. One last thing, Joe, if you could. Since it's a joint meeting, any other comments or questions from the school committee, Catherine, through you to your members?
Anything else from me, from the members? No, I think we just want to reiterate that, again, we heard the voters. We're going to look at those ways to potentially reduce the cost, but in the end, we feel this fits with the long-term facilities master plan that we have with the educational goals of the district, and we are waiting to see where this goes.
Thank you, Catherine. Dr. Baeta, if you could take a roll call vote, hearing no further questions or comments.
I can do that, Mr. Chair.
I have it here too, if you...
Yeah, whatever way you want to do it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Mr. Recupero.
Aye.
Ms. Hosseini.
Yes.
Ms. Monahan.
Aye.
Mr. Buckley.
Aye.
Ms. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Dorr.
Aye.
Mr. Cavey.
Steve isn't here right now. Tom and Steve had to leave.
Okay, thank you. Miss Fran, I always screw up your last name, Fran.
Yeah, aye. Yes.
French, yeah, okay, thank you. And we have, and that's a vote that's also part of the town manager vote, as Fran represents the town manager at the meetings. I don't see anyone else who is voting on this matter.
I am Melissa Lynch, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Melissa, didn't see you on the call. Sorry.
I had to pop in late, I apologize.
Miss Lynch, thank you. Seeing no others, it is 7 votes in the affirmative.
Great. Thank you all. If there's nothing further from anyone on the school building committee, is there a motion? Actually, we'll adjourn and then you adjourn, Catherine, if you want. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Joe Baeta, Jake. Move, Jake Dorr, second. So, Joe, can you run through again quickly?
TJ?
Yes.
Joyce?
Yes.
Katie?
Yep.
Catherine,
Yes.
Jake,
Yeah.
Diane, Fran,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
and I vote aye. And by the way, I'd like to correct the vote that I voted aye on the yes as well on the prior motion, so it was 8-0.
Great. Catherine, to you.
All right, may I have a motion from the school committee to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn the school committee meeting.
All right, that was made by
Second.
Lindsay Crick. Second by
Chris,
you. All right, Chris Shannon. All right, roll call vote. Lindsay Kreckler,
Aye.
Armando Barbosa,
Aye.
Chris Shannon,
aye.
Karen Powers,
Aye.
and myself, I vote yes as well. So we have adjourned.
Thank you all. Thank you all who attended.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.